website, and then also BHHS PTO will put it up on their website too, and Facebook
Oh, okay.
it around. All right. Um,
Excellent.
but I'm super excited about tonight, and that we have over 93 people registered to listen to Alicia Jenke and the Pathway to College. Uh, we worked really hard as a committee, the Health and Wellness Committee, to come up with things that you guys wanted to hear. And obviously, we're thrilled that we've gotten such great response back that reinforces like, okay, we're on the right track. So when we ask you, please fill out those evaluations. We actually do take the time to look at them and read them. And especially because the Health and Wellness Committee is going to be start planning our speaker series for next year. If you guys could take the time to fill out those evaluations that were attached to the email with the Zoom, that would be super helpful. This is our last speaker of the year. Of course, we saved the best for last, right, Alicia? And there's two things that I was really excited about this year. One is the collaboration that we were able to do with Bloomfield Hills High PTO. Hi, Catherine. I don't know if Anna's here, but Angel Lau, who is our fearless leader, chairman, is always all about like the greater the collaboration, the wider the reach. And the fact that we have 93 people and like 6 different schools on this Zoom call is fabulous. And then the second thing that I'm really excited about is we did the speaker series based on feedback from you guys. And so if you keep on telling us what you want, we will make sure that we make it happen. Because the worst thing for us is if we spend time and nobody comes, right? Because then it's a waste of time for us and it's non-value added for you. Okay, so before we get started, let's go over some household items. Number one, most of you guys have your speakers off, great. Number two is Alicia would like you guys can type questions into the chats, and then what's gonna happen at the end is Angel's kind of gonna moderate that, and then Alicia will stop her presentation around 8:05 to answer the questions until 8:30. All right. So if you have questions along the way, make sure you just type it into the chat and then we'll get with it. And Alicia was so nice. She said if she doesn't get to all the questions, she can make sure that we either add it into the website or you can email her directly too. All right. So she has been so gracious about offering her time up for that. And finally, just once again, please fill out the evaluation. It helps us out a lot. All right. Okay. So without further ado, I want to introduce Alicia Jenke. She has a varied background. She was as a teacher and a counselor for 38 years. And most of those years was in Bloomfield. So I know Catherine knew her, and I'm sure that maybe other Bloomfield Hills families know her as well. But about what, 7 years ago,
6 years ago, yeah.
She went off and decided to start her own company, and it's called Ace College Consultants.
Yes.
And she and her partner, I think he does more the financial end, or
he does more, yes.
Financial.
He does more of that, and I was gonna just mention something about that quickly.
And then so they have been doing this for 6 years, and they have a host of students. They work with some from the beginning of their college journey to the end, and some they just do as an ad hoc basis based on what you need. So she is a great resource to tap into. Just a little personal about her, she has 3 master's degrees because she loves it all, loves to learn, right? And she's had a master's from University of Michigan and then 2 from Eastern Michigan. So we are going to be learning from you tonight instead of you learning.
Well, thank you, Sue and Angel. Thank you very much for the invitation. And as Sue mentioned, if there are any questions we don't get to, I'll get back to you on those. And if there are any questions that you asked that I don't have an answer for at the moment, I will also get the information and get back to you. So, my goal is for you to walk away with as much info that can be helpful to you as possible. So Sue gave me a number of questions that were submitted by you. And what I'm going to try to do is to incorporate those questions into the presentation. And then whatever is left, we can hopefully have enough time to go over that. So there are two areas that we're going to cover. One is creating that college list, or how to find that right fit for your student. And then also, how do you get in the admission process? And before we get into that, there are two questions or two areas I want to cover. Whenever I have gone to college presentations and listened to college reps talk, one of the questions that is often asked is, so what kind of a student are you looking for? And invariably, the response has something to do with that. They will mention the middle 50%. And that middle 50% refers to the college, to the freshman class profile. And I just wanted to make sure that you were familiar with that, because I'm going to be bringing that up as we go along. So when we talk about that middle 50%, we're talking about students who have a certain GPA range, who have a certain ACT, SAT range. And there's other information like, how many students were in the top 10% of their class, so on and so forth. But it's kind of good to know that, because that way you can, at least a little bit, you can look at your own son and daughter and see how they fit into the colleges that you are considering. So when you hear people talk about the middle 50% of the incoming freshman class, that's what they're talking about. What is the average GPA of that middle 50%? What is the ACT, SAT score? What are some of the basic data information? Obviously, there are other factors that are involved, but at least it gives you a little bit of a comparison point. The other question that I want to start out with is, the question was, are there any updates regarding ACT, SAT for college admissions? When should the student take it? How do you decide which test to take? I wanted to start off with the ACT, because obviously with the COVID and everything else, that portion has probably created the most chaos and the most confusion. The thing is, because of the difficulty of taking the test, so many schools have decided to make a test optional. And that unfortunately has led to a mistaken belief that students might have a chance of getting into colleges that they otherwise wouldn't get in. And what has happened, what's kind of coming out right now, is that most of the elite schools, most of the highly selective schools have gotten a tremendous increase in applications. And consequently, that acceptance rate has even gone down lower than what it was beforehand. The thing to keep in mind is the ACT, SAT is just a small portion. It's a portion of the whole picture. And generally, the ACT, SAT will confirm what the rest of the application looks like. It is not the most important critical part of the application. And if you don't provide it, you have to provide other ways of showing how competitive that student is. So if you're applying to Harvard, you're applying to Columbia, it really truly doesn't matter if you have that SAT or ACT in the end, because you have to have all of the other factors. And if you don't have those, then it doesn't matter. And so what has happened this year, what I'm hearing from a lot of the other consultants, is that a lot more schools have gotten so many more applications. Consequently, a lot more students have been put on wait lists, or have even been denied, denied because of the increased number of applications. And we'll talk about it some more, but I just wanted to kind of introduce it in the beginning. So my recommendation is when it comes to the ACT and SAT is if you should take it if you can take it. Your students should take it if they can take it. You should start in about the junior year of the spring of junior year. And you probably should not do it any more than 3 times. And you also should take both. And it doesn't mean you have to take them formally. You could do practice tests, but that way your son and daughter gets to see which one they do a little bit better on. Sometimes students do the same way on both. Oftentimes they do a little better on one or the other. And also there's a component where the students feel of, I can improve on this one better than I can improve on this one. So it's really a good idea to take both and then see which one the student feels they can improve on, and then do the remaining second and third time. If you want to do a third time, is just focus on that test. If your score falls within that middle 50% we talked about, then I would submit it. If it doesn't, if it falls below that middle 50%, then I would look back on the rest of the application and see how strong is that application without that ACT or SAT score. Am I competitive? If I look at that middle 50%, how competitive am I? Am I in the top 5% of my class or top 10% of my class? And as we'll go over through some things, you'll see that, you know, there are so many factors that are involved in it. But the bottom line is this: if you can take it, take it. If it falls within the 50%, submit it. If it doesn't, if it falls below, I would have some conversations with your counselor, take a look at your application and see if it's really wise, if this is really the best school for you to be applying to. Okay. Oh, the other thing that I just found out, and I think this is fairly new, is the ACT is now automatically super scoring. So if you take it more than twice, you will automatically now get a report that has a super score on it. So you don't have to figure out that on your own. And that's fairly new. This was just recent that has come up with. Okay, so let's start with the admission process. And I'm going to assume that the ACT is part of the process right now because we have no idea, the colleges have no idea how they're going to handle that. They're giving themselves 1 or 2 more years of being test optional. And by the way, test optional versus test flexible. Test optional means that you have a choice whether or not you submit. Test flexible means that they want something else. They may want, maybe if your son or daughter took PSAT, they might want those results. Or if they've taken AP test, they may want those results. They want something in place of it. So that's a difference between test optional and test flexible. And then there are a handful of schools that just don't want that at all. As a matter of fact, the California state schools don't even want you to submit the scores. They won't even look at them. And the other part that I want to tell you is that this actually has been going on for some time. This is not something new. COVID just kind of pushed it over the edge. But over the last, I don't know how many years, more and more colleges have been questioning the value of SAT and ACT. And more, and typically they were the small liberal arts schools who were making the decision of going test optional. And COVID pushed the big colleges to do the same. So will they come back to it? How will they handle it? Honestly, at this point, they even can't what they're going to do. So anyway, let's start with the admission process. For admission purposes, we divide, and I'm sure you have heard this before, we divide schools into 3 categories, and that's based on the acceptance rate. You have the safety schools that are roughly 70% or higher acceptance rate. Then you have the target schools that are roughly between the 30 and 70% acceptance rate. And then the reach schools, the dream schools, and those are any school that has 30% or lower acceptance rate. Now, I can't tell you how many students or parents who've said to me, well, my student has a 3.9, and they really have a great score. Michigan is a target school. any school 30% or lower is a REACH school, and you have to put it into that category. Okay, you cannot say just because I've got all these great numbers that for me that school is a target or even a safety. So just kind of keep that in mind. So when it comes to the admission process, the safety schools have a fairly straightforward, fairly logical, predictable process and outcome. And that is you submit your transcript. And basically all they're looking at is, do you have a college prep curriculum? They're looking at your GPA. Are you within that 50%? What is your SAT, ACT? Again, are you within that 50%? And if you submit it in a timely fashion, you should hear about 4 to 6 weeks, get a response. And that's called rolling admission. You send the application in, they respond to it, you get a response back. So the question that I want to insert here from one of the parents was when to apply. Is there a better chance of getting into harder schools if you send in your application by October 1? Are you better off sending in your application before that deadline, or doesn't it matter? Okay, so first of all, I'm going to tell you, make sure you follow your counseling office's schedule. You need to give them time to gather all the information that they need. One of the things that they have to provide is the high school's profile. And they can't produce that until they get all that information from different sources. So even though applications generally start on August 1st, the high schools are not ready to be doing that on August 1st. So follow whatever your college counseling office says, or your counseling office says. The second thing is, if the school you're applying to, oh, I'm sorry, Angel, I was going to tell you when to change, wasn't I? Okay, there you go. That's the right page. My apologies. And we'll get to that particular spot, so just leave it right there. When to apply, if you're applying to schools that have a deadline, then it really doesn't matter if you are the first one to apply or you are the last one to apply, because the colleges will not make any decisions. You can just leave it right there. Yeah. The colleges are not going to make any decisions until they have all of the applications. So they wait till, if it's November 1, then nothing is done until November 1. After November 1, if it's January 1 or January 15th, whatever the case may be. However, I always tell the students I work with, don't wait till the last moment. I tell the students that I would like all the applications in by November 1, regardless of whether you're applying early action, early decision, regular decision, whatever the case may be. But get it done by November 1. Generally, we never are done by November 1, but we typically are done then by Thanksgiving. And then this way, if there are any issues, if something didn't get through, if you have to call them and ask them a question, you have plenty of time to call them and resolve whatever issues may be. So don't wait till the last moment. But in terms of your chances of getting in, it really doesn't matter. Okay. And then I also want to talk about, at this point, rolling admission, early action, early decision, and regular decision. Rolling admission is typically, the safety schools are the ones who have it. So you submit it, they respond to it, you get your answer. Early action, early decision, and regular decision all have deadlines. Typically, early action is November 1. Some schools may have November 15th. Typically, ED, early decisions, are November 1. Now it's become more popular for schools to have ED1 and ED2. ED1s are typically November 1, ED2s are in January, along with the regular decision. And regular decision is generally January 1, January 5th, someplace in there, depending on the school. The difference between EA and ED, ED is binding, meaning that if you apply under the ED early decision and you get accepted, you are asked to remove all your other applications from all the other schools. And what you're saying is, this is the school I'm going to go to, which also means for that you are agreeing, basically, you better be prepared to pay the full cost, because you're saying, I'm going to go there. And you're not going to know how much financial aid you may be getting from them until after that decision is made. So really be very cautious about, going the ED route. Now, the kicker is that more and more schools, especially the selective schools, they accept more students through the ED. And so if you really want to go to a particular school, your chances of getting accepted are slightly better if you go as an ED student than if you go as a regular student. For example, one thing that I just saw from my organization that I belong to, the IECA, Duke's acceptance rate from the regular decision this year was at 4.3%, which is really low. So if you wanted to go to Duke, going ED makes more sense if that's really the school you want to go to. But again, then you're kind of caught in that financial part of it. I had to be prepared to pay the whole thing because I have no idea how much they're going to pay me. So just when you choose that option, just be very, very thoughtful about it. Make sure you've covered all the different factors in before you make the decision to do it. Early action, excuse me. Early action simply means that if you apply by a certain date, you're going to get a response by a certain date. And generally it means, if it's November 1, you'll hear by end of December, maybe beginning of January. And it's just a way of kind of maybe creating a little bit of calmness, saying, okay, I got into these places. So I know I have some schools that I already gotten into. And it also helps the schools because they know how many students are truly interested in their schools. But early action is not binding. So you can apply to as many schools as you want to under early action. Early decision is binding. And regular or the RD is simply that the regular decision is simply you apply by January 1, you will hear in March, April, sometimes at that point. Okay, so those are the three things. So safety schools, straightforward, very predictable, if you will. Target schools are the ones, remember I said, are between that 30 and 70% acceptance rate, and the admission process here is varied. Some may have letters of recommendation, some may not. Some may want essays, some may additional essays, some may not want any. Generally, the closer they are to that 70%, the more they resemble the safety schools process, admission process. The closer they are to 30%, the closer they resemble that process. But there's a lot of variety. And if you understand, the safety school admission process, and you understand the REACH school process, then you'll be fine with the target schools. Okay, I think next, Angel, I think next. Yes, let's go on to the REACH school. So REACH schools are those that have 30% roughly acceptance rates or lower. I like to say that those are the schools where every student has a low chance of getting in. And what you need to remember is this: if you look at a school that has, let's say, a 10% acceptance rate, within that 10%, the college is saying we want to have, let's say, 5% of first generation students. We want to have, 10% of international students. We want to have this percentage of underrepresented population. We want to have students from every part of the state. And so all of a sudden, if it's a class, let's say, of 2,000 students, all of a sudden, you may actually be looking at maybe 1,200 now. So that acceptance rate is really an important factor when you look at the schools and you're trying to figure out what are my chances of getting in. And their admission process is very complex, very involved. It may seem illogical to those of us on the outside. And what they do, I apologize, I'm getting over a cold, believe it or not. And you would think those colds have disappeared, right? With COVID now. So what the Reach Schools transcript, unlike the safety schools that simply look at, do you have a college prep curriculum? The Reach Schools, I like to say that they dissect the transcript. They look at not only do you have the college, a college prep curriculum, but how many AP classes have you taken? How many honors classes? How many IB classes? And they look at the schools, and that's why the school's profile is very important. They look at what the school is offering. And so if the school is offering 20 AP classes, but the student only took 2, that student may not be as competitive as another student who took 6 AP classes or 10 AP classes. So even though you have AP classes on the transcript, it also depends on what is the curriculum of your school and has the student taken full advantage of that curriculum. They recalculate the GPA. So they eliminate a lot of the elective courses. And it doesn't, it's not a question of weighted, unweighted, because they recalculate their own GPA, and that's what they use in the admission process. So one of the questions that was asked is, how can a student with an IB diploma and grades above average capitalize on those assets? Which universities prioritize admitting students with an IB diploma? Okay, so here's the thing. Colleges definitely like IB students. There's no question about it, because they're familiar with the rigor of the curriculum. But it also means that the student it's just not enough for them to have the IB courses or to be part of the IB program. They have to do well in those as well. So if you have a 3.2 in an IB curriculum, they're still looking at the fact that there are students who have 3.9 in an IB curriculum, and that's who you are competing against. So, the question was, how can you capitalize? I'm not sure that that's the right word, that you can capitalize on it, but it definitely makes a student more competitive. It certainly shows that the student can handle rigorous coursework. They still have to do well in those courses. And I'm not aware of any school that necessarily prioritizes IB in terms of acceptance, but I know that there are schools that provide college credit for students with IB courses or IB diploma. For example, Alma, I understand, gives up to 32 credits for an IB student. And there are other schools that, like with AP, they will give credits. So I'm not sure it's actually a prioritizing, but there certainly are benefits to the IB curriculum. Oh, which electives? You know what? I will answer that one, even though I was going to do it at the end. What they're looking for are academics. They're looking at English, math, science, social studies, world languages. They eliminate, the musics, the gyms, the arts, so on and so forth. Now, it doesn't mean that those don't mean anything. They very much show a picture of the student, but in terms of the GPA, they only count those 5 academic classes. Okay, that was a great question. Okay, list of activities. Okay, let me leave that one for later. There was another question that popped up. A list of activities. The question that came up was, should you list activities you've been involved with longer at the top, or those that had a bigger impact on others? That's really an excellent question. Here's the thing about activities. What the colleges are looking for they're looking for examples of leadership, commitment, and initiative. And let me give you an example, for example, of an example of 2 students who, let's say, help out in an animal shelter. Okay. They both may start in 9th grade, and they both go twice a month. They're both awesome kids. They go in, they work hard, they do what they're told to do, great helpers. One student goes in, does what he's told to do, goes home. The other student goes in, helps out, does what he's told to do, or she's told what to do, but they look around and they go, you know what? These animal shelters, they really need towels and they need newspapers, and so on and so forth. And they go home and they maybe create a flower and they pass around in the neighborhood, and they say, hey, if you have any paper or extra towels, can you put them on your porch? Next Saturday, I'm gonna run around and pick them up to take them to this shelter that I'm helping at. Or they may, go through the religious affiliation, or maybe they send out an email to all their friends, whatever they do. But they see a need. And then maybe once a year or twice a year, they do this simple drive of collecting newspapers and towels, old towels that the animal shelter needs, and they bring it over there. So even though both students have been doing this for 4 years, the student who took the initiative to fill a need, that student's activity is going to be far more competitive than the other student who was very conscientious, did what he was supposed to or she was supposed to do, but that's all they did. And yes, all the activities are only from high school. They're not from middle school. So it's that kind of approach with the activities. So in that case, I would put that activity for that student toward the top. May not be number 1, but it might be number 2, number 3, depending what else that student has done. But it's all about, keep in mind, it's all about the commitment, the leadership, and the initiative. And it doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering, like finding global cure for cancer or anything like that. It can be something as simple as helping an animal shelter with some supplies. Okay, so the other thing that's important with the activities is how the student describes those activities. On the Common Application, they can list up to 10 activities, and they have to describe them. And some, a lot of students will say, well, just help at the animal shelter. That's not as impressive as when they sue and they say, have collected supplies twice a year for 4 years. So you try to get them to use a lot of action verbs in describing their activity. Okay. Letters of recommendation. Again, follow your counselor's schedule, whatever they tell you. Generally, they'll say, give us at least 2 weeks time. And that same thing applies to teachers. I know sometimes schools ask that students ask teachers at the end of junior year, so the teachers have longer time. Whatever the school tells you, follow that. But typically, letters of recommendations, not typically, they all have to come from academic teachers. So, you know, your band teacher may be phenomenal and you have a great relationship with them, but that letter is not going to do a lot. You need it from, typically it's a math and science, and then the other one is from the humanities. And stick to the required number. If they say 2, submit 2. If they say 1, submit 1. If they say you can hand in 2 additional ones, that's awesome. But make sure that those letters are going to talk about something different that's not in the other letters. If it's just the same repetition of the same information, those letters will mean nothing. And also make sure that if there are additional letters that are allowed, it's someone that truly knows the student, not just that that person has an impressive title, but that they truly know the student and they can talk about the student. That's what the colleges are looking for. They're not impressed that it was, a university president who wrote a letter of recommendation for that student if that letter doesn't address some unique qualities about that student that that person knows and is familiar with. Okay. The other thing that I tell students, excuse me for just a moment. The other thing I tell students too is, think about the teachers that you want letters of recommendation from, and try to establish a relationship with those teachers. But make sure it's genuine. Because really what you're doing is you want to give the teacher as much ammunition to write a great letter of recommendation as you possibly can. So if you walk into the classroom and you sit down and you may be a great student, you know the material, you get all A's, but you come in, you sit down, you do your stuff, you walk out, that teacher's not going to have a lot of stuff to write about you. But if you come in, you ask questions, perhaps you see a student who's struggling in the classroom and you help them out, or you volunteer to do something, then that teacher has a lot more things that they can talk about you and how that student is performing in the classroom on a daily basis. And those can be very powerful. So I tell the students, make sure you give the teacher something to work with. Okay, and kind of think about it early on. Don't just decide, oh, I better start talking to the teacher, because I'm going to be asking them to write a letter of recommendation. So that should be something that students think about it a little bit way ahead of time, so they can kind of think about how they're going to approach the teachers. And the other thing too is don't hesitate if you have a conflict. Sometimes that can be a really great teacher to write a letter, because it's about how you approach that conflict. If you're struggling in the classroom, don't hesitate. Don't just go with the ones where you're getting straight A's, because sometimes the teacher, in the classroom where you are having a difficult time, and it took everything for you to get a B+ in there, for example, that teacher may have a ton of really good stuff to write about you, and say how you approached them, how you approach, the situation, how you worked it out. Those can be powerful letters. So, don't just think you have to go with the situation where you're getting all A's and you're doing great and there's nothing going on there. Don't be afraid to look at some of the other options. Essays. The question that was submitted was, what are college admissions looking for in the essay? Any tips on making your essay a wow? Boy, you have a whole new session on that just alone. But let me tell you a couple things about the essays. I understand that IA has given a subscription to all juniors for the college essay guide. He is a phenomenal resource for writing essays. And if your son or daughter hasn't taken advantage of it, make sure that they do, because there's a lot of really good information that he offers. But basically, what colleges are looking for in the essay is, who are you? How do you think? How do you interact with people? How do you see the world? Okay, they want to see creativity, they want to see introspection. And so the more that you can share with them about the process of whatever the topic is, it doesn't matter what the topic, it truly doesn't matter what the topic is. It's how has whatever it is you're talking about, how has it impacted you? How has it made you maybe into the person that you are? Or how has it made you into the person you want to be? Or how is that tied in with the career that you're looking at, or the major that you're looking at? The example that I always like to use is, I worked, and this is a number of years ago, I worked with a student whose mother passed away when he was 12 years old. And so he was 17 at that point. It was only 5 years since that happened. And his father convinced him that that's what he should write about. You know, one of those prompts says, if you have had any kind of a situation in your life. And so the father convinced the boy to write about it. He was not ready to write about that. And so the first draft that I got was, well, my mom died when I was 12. I was very sad. It was really hard on us, but my dad and I got closer. I mean, you get the idea. It was basically, and it was painful because, you know, it was sad. But in terms of colleges, it didn't do anything. And it took, oh my gosh, it took us 3-4 times maybe. And finally he started, and by the way, he wanted to go into music. And he finally, I think it was like on the 4th time that we met, he finally started talking about the fact that what he missed the most was the fact that his mom loved to sing. And they would spend evenings, him and his parents, and they would spend evenings singing. And one of the parents played the guitar, I can't remember which one now. And he realized that that has given him such a love for music that that's what he wanted to go into. In the end, it was a beautiful essay that he wrote, and it was very simple. That there were no, million-dollar words in there. He didn't use that. It was a very simple, simply written essay. But what it talked about was, he connected. It wasn't about his mother's death anymore, but it was about how her love of music transferred to his love of music, and how it has, without him realizing it, how it has guided his choice of career. And he just went into it, and it was beautiful. He got in. And that essay was a wow essay. It really was, even though it was a sad topic. But if he were to talk only about the death, that has, as sad as it is, it has nothing to do with the college. But because he tied it now to the kind of person he became, how it affected him, how he dealt with it, and how it's affecting his career choice, that made it a powerful essay. So, as your son or daughter is looking at what do I write about, first of all, the essay guy is really good about telling you how to break that down, so you kind of can figure out. He's also very good at telling you what kind of format to use. There's a montage, he calls it a montage, which is a collection of little incidences that you tie together, or what I call a collage, or it's more of a narrative where you start with this incident, and because of this happened, because of this happened, and then consequently, this is what happened. So he goes into all that kind of stuff, and he helps the students break it down in terms of writing. But in terms of the topic, it has to be something that the student feels strongly about, that the student can connect to them, to how it's affecting them, and tying it in to, what he's going to be doing with the rest of his life. Those are the essays that stand out. Remember that these people read thousands of essays. And so if you're reading the same thing over and over and over and over again, it, it doesn't pop out as something else that, you say, oh my gosh, it's talking about a parent death, but wait a minute, he turned it around. That's he's talking about something else here. So to me, that's what the wow is. It has to be genuine. It doesn't matter what the topic is. And if your son or daughter has a great sense of humor, don't be afraid to let them use that humor in the essay. If they're serious, then that essay should be serious. A parent just told me the other day that they saw an essay about Costco. And they said it was a great essay. And that student actually ended up getting into Harvard and a bunch of other schools. Now, the essay wasn't the only thing that got them in. But, who would write about Costco? Really? But it's the way the student connected it to showing how they're thinking about the world, and so on and so forth. And it's really important for that student's voice to come through. That's why, if somebody else writes it and the student kind of edits it, that voice doesn't come through. And don't be afraid if it doesn't have big words in it. It can be written fairly simple. Yes, that's our website that Angel just put up. So don't be afraid if it looks simple. It's not so much about looking simple, it's about the content and about what the student is saying. And, is the college getting a sense of that student? And so it has to be, it's something the student needs to give some thought to. It can't be written the week before the application is due. It's something the students really should, juniors should be working on their personal statement right now, so that they can write it, they can put it aside, they can come back, they can re-edit it. And then they will also have more time to write all the other essays that they have to write. Okay, so that's one part of the admission process for these elite schools, the REACH schools. The other side, and let me just see something here. Okay, Angela, if you can flip to the next slide. Then there's the other side of the coin, which is, we talked about the student, now we talk about the college. And initially when colleges look at all the application, it's about, is this a great student? Let's find all these great students. But at some point, they switch to, what does a great class look like? And you know what? I meant to bring down a book, Jeff Selingo. Oh my goodness. It's called Who Gets In and Why. I was going to show you the book, but it's called Who Gets In and Why by Jeffrey Selingo. Is a really good book, a little bit of dry reading, but it's an excellent book. He's a journalist who basically writes about higher education. And he has spent a year, Emory University, Davidson College, I forget what the other one was. He spent a year working with those universities, sitting in on their admission meetings, watching them actually go through all those applications. And he talks about all of that. So if you want to get a really good understanding, I would recommend that book. Jeffrey Selingo, Who Gets In and Why. And I'm going to come back to the book in just a second. But anyway, so the other side of the coin now is the school's agenda. And here's why these REACH schools, the admission process is so unpredictable and so illogical it appears like, is because it's no longer about the students, it's about the school's agenda, as I just said earlier. The problem is we don't know what that agenda is. And the other problem is that agenda changes from year to year. So when colleges talk about diversity, their definition, yes, that's a book. Their definition is very broad of diversity. It's not just ethnic, it's socioeconomic, it's geographic, it's first generation students, it's balancing athletic students and intramural students, because you want to have clubs and you want to have big program athletics, and you only have so many spots. So how do you then create this class? And that's what it becomes. They shape this class. And so a student may initially, students will never know this, but a student initially may have been put into the in pile, but as they start shaping that class, they realize that they have, let's say, 20 students from Midwest and not enough students from the South. And they want to have a good representation from all over. So now they start taking students out or putting them in. And this is what we don't see and we don't know. But that process is very complicated. It's very unpredictable. And you just don't know when you're applying as to what the college is going to be looking for and what is their agenda for that particular year. A couple of years ago, for example, Princeton wanted to have more first generation students. And so a higher percentage, and we're talking about, a difference of maybe 1 or 2%, but that they don't have a lot of students that they accept. So because their emphasis was on first generation students, there were some incredible students who didn't get accepted. Okay. This is just the reality of the situation. But I think you need to be aware of it so that as you're building that college list that we'll talk about in a minute, you're aware of those things. Okay. So the one thing that Jeffrey Salingo talks about in the Who Gets In and Why, which I found kind of fascinating a little bit, is he talks about the buyers and the sellers. And he's saying that the buyers, or the sellers rather, are the heads of the admissions. In other words, they have something to sell that consumers want. So you're basically talking about the schools with a 30% or lower acceptance rate. And then the buyers are the have-nots in terms of admissions. Those are the schools who are simply struggling to get students into seats. And I kind of compare this to like, I don't know why I think of this, but I think of like creating that wedding list. Do you remember creating for your wedding? And you had so many people you wanted to invite, but the venue you chose only could accommodate so many people. So then you get into this, well, who do I invite? Who do I drop off? If I invite so-and-so, then I have to invite this person. And all of that kind of stuff. And that's what the colleges get into. We have so many spots. We want the class to look like this. Now, who do we pick to fit the class that we are trying to create? The other fact, let's see. Oh, okay, here we are. Let's see, what else did I want to say about that? So as I said at the very beginning of the evening, because people thought without ACT I might have a better chance. It was the reach schools, the elite schools that got so many more applications. They went up like 20-30% up. It was interestingly, the target schools are the ones whose actually application numbers fell. But the problem then that has been created is the more students applied, the class size has not changed. And so this year, I think what we're going to find out is the acceptance rates actually are going to be lower than what we've seen in the past from these universities. Hopefully next year, students have realized, and maybe we'll go back to the old balance a little bit better. But that is an issue. Okay, so let's take a look now at, we can go to the next one, Angel. Let's take a look at that college list, okay? The question was, what do you need to keep in mind when selecting a college? What I like to do is I like to create a framework as I'm building a college list for a student. And in that framework, I come up with a number of criteria that family is looking for. Some of the basic criteria, for example, location. Are you in state? Are you out of state? If you're out of state, do you are you looking at a particular area, or doesn't it matter where in the country you go? I'm working with a student right now who told me any place warm. I don't care where, just any place warm. Nothing cold. I said, okay, that makes it easier. So think of how far from home. Some students will say, I don't want to go too far. So maybe a 4-hour drive from home, maybe a 6-hour drive at the most. But the location is an important one, and it will help you narrow it down. Size. You've got the small schools, the 1,200, 1,500. So you've got 3,000, then you have the 5,000s, and all the way up to 40,000, right? When you look at the size, look at two things. One is look at the undergrad enrollment and look at the graduate enrollment. Because some schools will say we have 5,000 students, but they also have 5,000 grad students, and most of those students are on campus. So you're really looking at a 10,000 student campus. And if your son or daughter is looking for a certain size, make sure you keep both the undergrad and the grad enrollment in mind as you're building the list. Big city, near a big city, far away. Another student I'm working with right now, she told me anything but a big city. She wants a small town. So that already eliminates a whole bunch of colleges that we would be looking at. The other thing with size is there are academic factors. Actually, those are connected to the size, and social factors. What I tell the students is, do you want to be a big fish in a little pond, or do you want to be a little fish in a big pond? And trying to get the students to think about that a little bit. And you have to also look at your son or daughter, and you have to look at their personality, and you have to look at their learning style. If they're the kind who do well, no matter what the teaching style is, then they might do really well in a large university. But if your son or daughter does better where they're in a classroom where they connect with the teacher, where they're able to ask questions, where even the teacher looking around and saying, oh, you don't look like you get this concept, or you look like you have a question. If your son or daughter does better in that kind of environment, then maybe a smaller school would be more productive for them. So you have to look at some of those factors. How well do they advocate for themselves? Research opportunities. Sometimes large universities offer a lot of research opportunities, but you're competing with the grad students. Whereas in a smaller school, or maybe school that only has undergrads, then you have more opportunities to participate in a lot of different research because you're not competing with the grad students. So there's some of the factors. Some of the social factors, if your son or daughter, if you ask them about college and they say, oh yeah, I can't wait for, the football season and to be able to go all the games, and I want fraternities or sororities. bring them back to why they're going to college. Let's talk about the academic stuff as well, even though the social things are very important as well. If you have, a student who's maybe a little more reserved, who doesn't make friends as easily, um, then maybe a smaller environment might be a little bit better for them. Um, Although if they're in a big environment and they can at least find a niche for themselves, and then that's fine also. But be aware of it. Where do you think socially your students will blossom the most? Where do you think academically they will blossom the most? So when you're thinking about the size, think of your son's or daughter's personality and learning style and see what would be better. So the next thing that came up with area of study, the question was, if my student doesn't know what they want to be, how do you decide on a college? Well, let me tell you this. What was the latest statistic I saw? I think it was somewhere between 50 and 75% of students change their majors at least once. And it is not unusual for students to change their mind. So if they're going in not quite sure what they want to do, I wouldn't panic as much. It's better for them to maybe go in and start exploring than to go in and then changing, because depending what it is they go in, some of the programs are more structured, whereas other programs allow the student to take a variety of classes and explore. And so you want to make sure that if you have a student who doesn't know what they want to do, that they're in a situation where they can explore. They will not be penalized for exploring. So places like, let's say Brown University has an open curriculum. The student gets to decide how they want to structure. And so that would be a great place. Obviously, it's a very difficult place to get into, but there are other places that, that offer that as well. I would encourage them to explore as many different interests as they can. And don't those interests don't all have to be super serious. I mean, if the student's into photography, encourage them to enjoy photography, get into that. If they're interested in the environment, encourage them to be somehow involved in that area, whatever the case may be, but encourage them to check a lot of things out, and don't feel like it all has to somehow fit into a certain pattern or a certain major, because they will find their way. They will find their way. It's better when they have more options. Exactly. Who knows what you want to do when you're 18? I totally agree with the person who put that in. The other thing is you can help them through community service, encourage them to get involved in different community service situations. And I know it's difficult right now with COVID, but as things open up, encourage them to get involved in that, because that's where they find out what they like. The other thing that you can do is, and again, IA students are very fortunate, through the SCORE program platform that the school uses, there's something called U Science, YOU, one word, YOU science.com. And the students have access to that. It starts, I believe, in 10th grade, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they have to complete it in their 11th grade. Excuse me. Ask your son or daughter, if you have a 10th grader, 11th grader, ask them about that. What the U Science is, an assessment that focuses on skills. Then there's a majors component. There's also a college list component. I don't like the college list. I'll be very upfront. I've looked at it a number of times. I just don't understand how they're coming up with that list. I don't see any connection between what the student is saying and what the lists are coming up with. So I tell the students that I work with, don't look at that, but definitely look at the careers. And they give them like the top tier and then the second tier, and it's based on the skills. So for example, if you have a student who's very into engineering, and based on how they answer the questions, sure enough, when you look at all the careers, most of them are in engineering. Or you have a student who's interested in engineering, and you look at the careers and not too many of them in engineering. That's a good conversation then for you and your child. You may like that, but are your skills really okay? They may maybe not match. I had a student just the other day who's not sure what they want to do. And as they were looking through it, and they came to astronomy. And so I said, read to me what it says. So he read astronomy. He goes on, and then he goes, I've actually been thinking about astronomy. And so it was great. Check it out. Look and see what that requires. Let's take a look at that. So take a look at the, ask your son or daughter about that. If they haven't done it, make sure they do it. If they've done it, have them share it with you. It's really good. Then the other factor that I would say is, oh my goodness. Yes, thank you. I will hurry up. See, I have a tendency to do a lot of talking. Another factor is big name school versus best fit school. I'm just going to be blunt. That really needs to be part of the conversation is, are we looking just at the name, or is this really because it fits the personality, the profile, and all of that kind of stuff? So make sure that's part of the conversation. Let's see, what else? Okay. Now I need to finish this. The last factor, and really this should be the first factor, is how are you going to pay for this education? If your son or daughter is old enough to be going away to school, they're old enough to understand the money part of it. And they need to understand that financial aid does not mean free money. Financial aid means maybe work study. It mostly means loans. And then it may mean some merit award. And how much debt are you willing to graduate with? And if you're looking at maybe pre-med and you're looking at medical school, do you really want to graduate with $80,000 in debt? The elite schools are somewhere between $70,000 and $80,000. They also are not the most generous in terms of merit award. And again, what I would recommend is if you had a financial aid person that can really go into that whole thing, not just the FAFSA, that's just one little part of it, but to go into the whole thing, that may be helpful. But please make sure that talking to your son or daughter about the cost of the education and how that's going to be paid for is very critical. And that will help them then make better choices as to which colleges they will be applying to. So let's go at the miscellaneous that I have here. When to start the process. You can start the process at any point. Actually, the earlier, the better. But what I mean is this. If you start at the beginning of junior year, that's great. You want to give yourself time to gather information, process that information. When I do a college list, it probably takes us about 4, believe it or not, 3 to 4 meetings with the family before we finally agree on the final list. And it's a give and take where, after parents and students start looking at it, they're going, oh, maybe that's not really the best fit. And so give yourself enough time to do it. If you have a 9th or 10th grader, you can focus on the community service, building the interest, all the other things that we talked about. So the process can be started at any point, but don't wait till the summer before senior year. Then that's going to become very stressful. How many schools should you apply for? I typically recommend 6 to 8 schools. And I also recommend that you balance, that list must be balanced, meaning you need to have 1 or 2 from the safety category. You should have 1 or 2 from the target, and then the rest can be from the dream schools. And the safety school, this is critical. The safety school must be one that your son or daughter is going to be comfortable and likes and is excited about. Don't just say, well, okay, I don't care. I'm just going to put something because you're asking me to put a safety school, because you may end up going there. I just saw something across on my professional organization here, a student who applied to 14 schools. They got responses from 11. They didn't get into any of those or were put on wait list. They were still waiting to hear from 3 others. That tells me that there was not a well-balanced school. They just did not look at it very carefully. We talked a little bit about the freshman, sophomore. Oh, how do you narrow down the list if you can't visit? That was one of the other questions. There's a website called campustours.com. It's sort of a one-stop place. You can look for colleges by location, by state. You can look by name. It doesn't have all of the universities and colleges, but it has a lot of them. So if you just want to get a feel for the schools and start getting some stuff, it's a really good website. The other one is go to the individual schools' websites, and they will either offer virtual tours, or they may even have scheduled with a student, a tour with a student, or where you may be able to interact actually and ask them questions. So even though you can't visit, you can at least get an idea. And the last question, that was residential colleges or honors programs. Those typically are, once you start applying, they will indicate if there's a separate application or not. Residential colleges are really good, like for example, for MSU, Lyman Briggs. If you're into pre-med or a science, get into Lyman Briggs, and it gives you a much smaller environment in a huge school. So, and the same thing goes for honors programs. There's a lot of benefits actually, but the biggest one is that it gives you the idea of a smaller environment. Okay. You know what? So I think, why don't we start, Angela, why don't we start questions? And let me start with the one that just popped up right now, which was, how do you start out with the schools if you don't know anything about them? So here's what I would recommend. One is, like even the campus tours, they give you a lot of information there about the different programs and the athletics and different things. So you might start with something like that. Just take a couple tours, familiarize yourself with the school. The other thing is, you can look. I hate lists. I mean, like US News and World and stuff like that. I know people rely on those sometimes. I would use that to simply become familiar with those schools, but I would not use that to create that list because there's so many other factors involved. Talking with your counselor, I know that you've got 2 phenomenal counselors, and I'm probably not saying that much different than what they've been sharing with your students. So they're a great resource. Talk to them as well. But take some tours. If you're watching basketball and you see different colleges, we just finished the March Madness, look up some of those schools. And this is just a way of you building that knowledge base. Let's see. For college admissions I'm sorry, I didn't catch that question, Angel. Angel, can you put up that question back?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, at the bottom.
Right, I didn't see it fast enough.
Gotcha.
There's something about.
Are there advantages of honors college?
There are some advantages, yes. Smaller classrooms. more direct contact with the professors, certain special programs, speakers. Sometimes you have earlier access to registration for classes. So definitely.
How do we figure out what best fit school is?
Start by looking at your son's or daughter's personality and their learning style. And if you have a student who is not afraid to advocate for themselves, then I wouldn't be hesitant for any large university. If you have a student who needs that teacher connection, I might be looking at a smaller school. Certain schools have reputation for certain programs. So if you're looking, there are certain schools that have better engineering programs than others. Talk to, maybe you have some engineering friends, talk to them and see where do they go to school? What programs are they familiar with? Your counselors can give you a list of some schools that have great engineering programs. So yeah, go ahead. Is there another one?
Is there a difference, or does it matter between varsity and JV sports from a college?
Not quite understand. You mean in terms of like on your activities list?
Yes.
No. But what you need to talk about is what did you do, whether it's the varsity or the JV? Okay. Did you just come into practice? You did your stuff, you walked out? Or did you take on some kind of a leadership role? And a leadership role doesn't mean that you have to be the captain. Would the coach say that you were the one who always made sure everyone had water? You always made sure that when the group went away to a game, that you made sure certain things were taken care of. Did you support other students? If you were sitting on the bench, did you cheer other students on? If you were one of the star players, did you support some of the ones who were sitting on the bench? So it's not so much which sport you were in, it's what did you do there?
If you're in an IB program, should you take AP exams? Does that help or add the qualifications of the student? Is that very
Well,
common?
the IB diploma obviously gives a certain level of rigor. The courses the students take indicate a certain level of rigor. It's really on what you want. And then, depending on some schools, like I said earlier, you may end up getting additional credit if you have an IB diploma versus if you have just some courses.
Is it better to keep the list of activities short, just focus on the main ones? Or should there be like a long wraparound activity list?
Common App allows you 10.
Okay. Is it important to have a
So
teacher
if you-
reach a letter of the subject students declared intended major? How important is it to declare a major on apps if your student really doesn't know?
You can be undecided. Students rarely are penalized for being undecided. Where it makes a difference, if you know, for example, like if you know definitely you're doing engineering, is because those students oftentimes are looked at a little bit differently. There are more specific number of spots that are available for engineering students. And for engineering students, they are looking, do they have certain backgrounds? And some colleges, it's more difficult to transfer into the engineering program once you're there, simply because students don't drop out of the engineering as much, maybe at that university. And so there just aren't the spots for students to try. It just depends on what it is a student want.
If you apply to a program like a music program, can you still apply to a regular program just in case?
It depends on which it depends on which universities you're applying to. Are you applying as a music major? Then you can perhaps have a double major in another area if you want. So yeah, it just depends on the university and how, how they structure their
Okay.
programs.
If a student got a 94% on the SAT, but it was lower than previous years, is this something colleges consider?
No, they always look at the best score. They will always consider the best score. And as I indicated just recently, ACT is now automatically super scoring for the students. So that's what the colleges will see.
Could you please give us a little bit of description of what exactly is a safety school? What does that mean?
So safety school is based on, the categories are based on acceptance rate. Safety school means that your student has a very high chance of getting into that school. And because the admission process is fairly straightforward, meaning transcript, GPA, as we mentioned, and you submit it relatively, early, there are spots, and so you will get in. So you're pretty guaranteed that you can get into those schools. So you're talking, if you look at the state of Michigan, Western, Central, Eastern, Grand Valley, those would all be for good students. Again, you've got to have the grades, but for good, solid students, those would be considered safety schools. MSU, it's interesting, I think of them as a safety school also, but what I hear this year, and I don't have the numbers, that they have just gotten an incredible amount of applications. And so I'm wondering if that acceptance rate is going to go a little bit lower, and MSU may be on its way to being sort of on the fence between a safety and a target school.
Okay, am I missing any other questions from anyone? Okay, Sue, you want to close us
Did
out?
we ask the one about, oh, sorry. Did we ask the one about should an IB student take a 7th IB subject or stick with music? Did we ask that one?
What I would recommend, that question is really talk with your counselors on that. But my opinion would be looking at you have to look at the whole picture. And you have to see how the student is doing, what all areas, what are the high level courses they're taking, so on and so forth, and just seeing the whole picture. Colleges don't want kids who are just, straight bookworms. They also want kids who have other interests and other talents that they bring to the university. And so, the music, the theater, the sports, the kids who do podcasts, and the kids who create clubs, all those kids make up a very interesting community that the colleges want to have. So a student who only has academics and doesn't have a lot of some of the other things, I'm not always sure if that's the best thing. But really, that's a conversation that should be with the counselor. Anything else that?
Yes, so we have one that says, do sport coaches write letters of recommendation or really just academic teachers?
Academic teachers. Like I said, if the college allows additional letters, you could have the coach write one, but only if they're going to talk about something different that the regular teachers are not going to talk about. So if there was something, the student did something very unique, maybe they took on a lot of different responsibilities or something like that, that a classroom teacher would not be writing about. But if the coach is just going to say, oh, that's a great kid, they're responsible, they've shown up to all the practices, that letter won't mean anything.
Okay, and then if a university's graduation rate is low, does it imply that kids may be transferring to other colleges prior to graduation?
Yeah, you look at the retention rate. So one of the ways you can, when you look at the retention rate, meaning how many students return at the end of their freshman year, and then you look at the graduation rate. And if those are a little on the lower side, there could be a variety of reasons. It could be that this is a good place for students to begin, and then they move on to other places, or it simply means that they accept everybody, but they don't provide a lot of support, and so students then end up dropping out. But if you look at, the highly selective schools, the top-notch schools, they all have, I would say, retention rates in the high 80% and up, and a fairly high graduation rate. Those are a good indication that that's a good place.
Okay, so I have a question for you. I know that a lot of kids take test prep, ACT, SAT prep. Do you have
Okay.
a preference between Kabir, Mally, or you don't think it's necessary? What's your stance?
And this is strictly my opinion. Okay. This is strictly my opinion. I think for the schools that we have in our area, those are all excellent schools, and IB obviously is an excellent school. So students get the content that they need to do well on the SATs, ACTs. Where they need help with oftentimes has to do with the strategies of taking the test, whether it's the timing, whether it's, how to read the question. So the help that they need is really more with strategy than it is with the content. So I think any place that will help you with the strategy would be, a good place. I'm not sure that you need, again, if you're in a good high school with a good solid curriculum, a little bit of help from Khan Academy or any of those places might be all that a student needs. But make sure that they know how to take the test, how to read the questions. Anything else? Okay, Sue? Angel?
I'm here. Hi.
Oh, good. Okay.
I think Sue must have had some,
Yes.
oh, she might have hopped off here. Let me see what she's saying. I got kicked out of the meeting. That's horrible. I wanted to thank everyone. I'll let her back in just a minute. Oh, here she comes.
Well, I'll tell you what, you have my email address. If there's something in the presentation that you want more information about, or clarification, or a question pops up, don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, well, it is 8:30. You did a great job on timing.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing all your wise, words of wisdom and all your experience with us. We really appreciate it. And we will definitely post your email if other people have questions. But thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much, and best wishes to everyone, and stay healthy.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Great seeing you. Good luck in the future with your college students. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, bye.